Today's conversation is going to be somewhat different. Over the last 10 episodes, I've taken a much more academic approach to these conversations, and there's nothing wrong with that. I did that intentionally because as I began rebuilding and rebranding the channel, I wanted to provide a foundation for many of the conversations we'll continue having together. On last week's episode, I talked about the idea that while understanding is a prerequisite for transformation, understanding alone doesn't equate to transformation. You can understand why you do what you do, why you think the way you think, and why you believe what you believe, but that doesn't necessarily mean the influence of those beliefs, perspectives, assumptions, and expectations in your life automatically changes simply because you now understand where they come from. So today, I want to spend some time talking about what it looks like when those beliefs, perspectives, assumptions, and expectations are still in action. Hello, and welcome to Daring Woman. I'm Dr. Latasha Pinckney, and through my work, I help people better understand the experiences, beliefs, and perspectives that shape how they see themselves, others, and the world around them. Whether you're trying to better understand your own life or you're someone who helps others make sense of theirs, welcome to the channel. Now let's get into it. I've always been a doer. Honestly, I've never really stopped to ask myself why it was so important for me to always be doing something. You know, most of the lessons or observations I've shared before are things I've already processed. But I think this is something I'm actually processing in real time. For me, I would say the reason I do is that at some point, I came to believe that doing gave me purpose. It makes me wonder how many of us have come to believe things about ourselves that simply became part of the way we lived without ever stopping to ask where those beliefs began. What do I mean by that? I think sometimes when you grow up uncertain about different things in life, you're always wrestling with and grappling for the things that can give you a sense of certainty, a sense of safety, and a sense of security. And I believe that's how in many instances hyper-independence begins to develop. By believing that if you take the lead, stay in charge, and take control of the situation or circumstances, then you can influence certain outcomes. As I've been reflecting on my own life, I think a lot of that uncertainty about who I was, where I belonged, and what my purpose was led me to become a doer. Not because I was trying to prove something to anyone else, that's the interesting part, but because I was trying to prove something to myself. Somewhere along the way, I needed to believe that what I did and who I was had both purpose and value. Not for anyone else, but for me. Maybe for you, it isn't doing. For you, it might be something else altogether entirely. But I wonder how many of us are living from beliefs we've never really taken the time to stop and examine. One of the things that's come along with all of this is that it's been very hard for me to be still because in many ways, I've always equated stillness with laziness and with underachievement. Now, I would have never considered myself an overachiever because I've always pictured overachievement in the context of performing for someone else. And since I was never trying to perform for other people, I thought that my doing was just me trying to do the very best I could and even challenging myself to do better than what I thought my best was. I didn't realize that was a perspective running underneath how I was showing up in life. I just thought I was pursuing excellence in the things I'd done and the things I wanted to do. And of course, there's truth to that. I do take my responsibilities very seriously. I do want to do my very best. Those really are values that guide how I live my life. But even though I understand this, every now and then I still find myself slipping back into doing. It's like I'm set to automation and doing has become a habit, a way of being. If I had to describe it, it's like someone being caught in the current of a stream. They're not fighting against it. They're simply going wherever the current carries them. That's the thing about a current. You don't have to choose the direction you're moving. If you're not paying attention, the current chooses it for you. I think that's what our beliefs, habits, and perspectives can become. They become so automatic that they simply carry us along without us even realizing that's the current we're flowing in. So as I said, stillness has been hard for me. Whenever I enter a season of stillness, there's a part of me that immediately thinks I need to be doing something because otherwise something must be wrong. It's like my brain just wants to keep doing. Now, if you've been listening over the past few episodes, I shared in a previous episode, or the first episode rather, that a couple of months ago, I completed my PhD. Here's the thing. That is something I had always wanted to accomplish. And I'm not going to tell you how long I've been out of college, but even after I completed undergrad, I had already been thinking about pursuing that path. But I was a little frightened by the prospect of completing a dissertation. Then after college came marriage, children, being a military family and moving around. So the circumstances and the timing just weren't ideal. But when the timing was right, I finally seized that opportunity. And for a long time, that's the story I told myself about why I pursued it. But as I've been reflecting, I realized that wasn't the whole story. Part of what led me to pursue it was an attempt to fill an empty space in my life. And one thing I've recently come to notice is that whenever life created space, I instinctively sought to fill it. Maybe some of you have felt the same way too. My family dynamics were changing, and although in good ways, it left an empty space that I didn't know how to just sit with. So I felt as though I had to be doing something, and doing something became a distraction because it kept me from simply sitting with that space. Looking back, I think that's what doing often felt like for me. It felt like being productive. There was this constant sense that I should be doing more, so I found myself trying to figure out what I was supposed to be doing next and filling that space with one project after another. Then when it was time to work on the dissertation, that consumed so much of my attention. Honestly, it was intoxicating. Whenever a new idea would pop up, I'd chase that rabbit trail and eventually bring all of those ideas together into a complete picture, which is essentially what I've been doing throughout this series, bringing together all of the experiences, meanings, beliefs, perspectives, and assumptions that eventually shape how we understand ourselves, relate to other people, and experience the world around us. And once that PhD program was over, I was met with that empty space yet again. So in my mind, I needed to fill it. I thought to myself, I did all that work studying something that has been deeply personal to my own life, looking at belief systems, looking at perspectives, looking at how those things influence us and how we begin changing the beliefs that no longer serve us well. And I was like, I want to do something with that. I wanted to take something very academic and make it accessible to people who may be searching for language to better understand themselves, and for those who spend their lives helping others search for that language too. And that's really what resulted in the rebirth of Daring Woman. Now, don't get me wrong, I had already been sharing on YouTube. I started this channel back in 2012, but at the time I wasn't sharing as consistently as I do now. While I'm proud of what I've accomplished with the channel so far, I've also noticed something. I'm still in the current of doing rather than being. Maybe this season has simply made me more aware of how I've been living for a long time. I show up here every Thursday and I share. But somewhere along the way, I think even this became another thing to accomplish. Of course, I genuinely want to be here with you because I love having these conversations. But as I've reflected on this season, I've also wondered whether I had begun treating this work I'm doing like I treated so many other responsibilities in my life. If I'm honest, I became so focused on whether I was doing it well rather than simply sharing what was on my heart and allowing these conversations to have whatever impact they were going to have. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm stepping away. You can't get rid of me. No, not at all. I still plan to show up here every Thursday and continue having these conversations with you. What I think is changing is that while I'll continue sharing lessons from experiences I've already had time to reflect on, I also want to share more of what I'm learning and processing in real time, because the truth is life is an ongoing process of refinement. We live, we learn, we reflect, we adapt, and then another season comes along with something new to teach us. One of the things I've been learning in this season is that we sometimes think we should be doing more, but maybe God is simply calling us to be still. not to do nothing, but to be still. And what I found is that being still isn't about doing less. Maybe it's about no longer needing what our doing has been giving us. I was listening to a podcast the other day that talked about how rushing or being in a hurry can get you out of alignment with the rhythm of heaven and therefore off the path God has for you. Now, what I'm talking about here isn't rushing per se, but I think the same can be true of being busy. And please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not referring to the ordinary responsibilities of life. Those things are absolutely essential. I'm talking about the spaces beyond those responsibilities that we sometimes try to fill simply to keep our minds occupied, especially when we haven't really stopped to ask whether that's something we're actually supposed to be pursuing. Why am I sharing this with you today? Because I know I'm not alone in this. There are many of us who are doing. We're operating out of our gifts. We're operating out of our talents. And that's a good thing because God gave them to us and we're supposed to use them. But here's perhaps the most interesting part of it all. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says that God has set eternity in the heart of man. And what this means is that there's something within us that longs for more, even if we don't always know exactly what that more is. For those of us who follow Christ, however, we recognize that longing was ultimately meant to be satisfied by Him. Yet, can I tell you, there can still be seasons when we experience a sense of emptiness. I believe, at least for me, part of my desire to do came from me wanting to faithfully steward what God had entrusted to me. When you recognize the capacity you've been given, there's a natural desire to use the gifts and talents God has given you as well as you can. I think over time, though, the doing can begin serving a different purpose. Without even realizing it, we can begin measuring ourselves by what we're accomplishing. And little by little, we can begin drawing our sense of value and even our identity from our effort instead of simply resting in who God says we already are. Who are you when you take away the activity? I think that's part of what this season has been revealing to me. I'm in the stage of midlife, and with that comes a lot of changes. I'm sure some of you listening are in that same season too. I find that as women, when our roles begin to change in our younger years, it was so much about building, whether we were building families, building careers, building. When so much of your identity has become connected to what you've been building, it's only natural that when those roles begin to change, you start asking, what's next? But maybe the question isn't simply, what should I be doing next? Maybe it's whether I'm pursuing what's being asked of me in this season, or whether I'm simply trying to fill yet another empty space. I wonder how many of us have spent years doing without ever stopping to ask what we were hoping all that doing would give us. So that's all I have for you today. I do hope this gave you a way of understanding yourself that you didn't have before. And you know how the rest goes. If something in this conversation resonated with you, please like and share. But until next time, keep reflecting, keep growing, and remember, sometimes the most powerful shifts in perspective begin with a single question.